Good evening and welcome to Wednesday night here at the Crossville Church of Christ. Thank you to those that join us online and by conference call, as well as all of you here in the auditorium. Tonight is the third night of our Vacation Bible School, and we appreciate all of you who have come, many of you each evening. And we'll save some announcements and other things typical for Wednesday night to the conclusion of our time together this evening. But we will begin tonight, or I will begin by maybe giving you a cautionary warning. They have assigned me 2 lessons tonight. So usually I'm the guy that goes overboard with 1 lesson. If I use that pun, I guess, with the Ark. So they've given me 2. So that means if you have a seatbelt there in your pew, you might want to buckle it because we've got to go fast. They have asked me to cover both the Ark and the flood. Looking at, the Ark and the animals. I know I'm going to upset Brother L.A. I think he has the flood tomorrow evening as we conclude our time together, but we'll look at the Ark and the animals tonight. The Ark and the animals. We've already looked at Noah, the man. We looked at that last night, and he's a lot like us in many ways, some ways different, of course. And we looked the first evening at the world that he lived in, again, in many ways similar to our own, with people disbelieving in God. And so those similarities we will build on tonight by looking at the Ark and the animals. Now, I thought what I could do, and I guess infringing on Jim's territory, we could just sing the song. We've been talking about favorite VBS songs on Sunday morning. As part of our worship, building our sermons around those, for those of you that aren't Crossville folks. But you remember the song that our children sometimes sing, "Good old Noah built the ark like God told him to." Well, that's true. That's a valuable lesson to learn about the ark. We could say that, and that would probably be saying enough in some regards. And then, if you know the rest of that song, it's kind of structured around the old MacDonald had a farm. Good old Noah built an ark like God told him to, and on this ark he put and you can provide the animal. And then the song leader gets to provide the animal sound with a whatever. If you're a cow, you're a moo-moo here. And of course, there's always that kid that says, good old Noah put a rhinoceros on the ark. And you have to try to figure out what sound does a rhinoceros make. I don't know. So we won't do that tonight, even though that may be going through your head. So we'll buckle up, and here we go, looking at the ark and the animals. I'm going to look at some of the things that are just kind of commonplace that you probably wonder about as you study this subject. Of course, we're in Genesis chapter 6, and we will refer to that really only sparingly. Not to say, of course, that Scripture is not important. It gives us dimensions and other things, but material names and things like that. But we have to put a lot into what the Bible tells us in a very brief record. So as we think about the design of the ark tonight, based on Genesis chapter 6, verses 14 to 16, we'll know these things. The ark was to be constructed of gopher wood. What was gopher wood? I don't know, except that it wasn't beaver wood or some other kind of animal wood. It is suggested by some it was an ancient form of cypress because of cypress's water-resistant qualities. I don't know that to be sure. Some of you more attuned and more skilled in identifying timber and lumber and its properties and things of that nature. You woodworkers likewise can appreciate that maybe even more than some of the rest of us can, but it was constructed of gopher wood. It was to measure 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, 30 cubits high. We're assuming an 18-inch cubit, and I'm actually going to mention kind of a variant idea related to that thought later on in the lesson, but a cubit was typically measured from your elbow to the tip of your fingers. And for most of us, that works out on average to about 18 inches. But there is a possibility of something else, as I said, we'll mention later. There were 3 decks on the ark, as it were, rooms or compartments within those where the animals would be housed. It was covered in pitch, we think a tar-like substance. There are naturally occurring tar pits, some in California that those of you who travel may have visited, or other places, and even this country and throughout the world. That may have been what this was, whether that was to provide sealant, both on the inside and the outside, or even for other purposes. We're not completely sure. And then it was to be built with a door in the side And there's something to be learned about that. We'll probably make that application spiritually as we have an invitation time tonight. And then there was to be one opening, or one window, as it were, at the top. And when I hear the word window, I know what I picture and what you picture. Whether it was actually like that or not, I'm not sure. And then there was a covering or an awning over this opening. Now, that's just a general summary of how God tells Noah to construct this particular vessel. And you find that there beginning in Genesis 6 and verse 14 through verse 16. Diagramming it, if you look at it this way, that's just one way to think about the ark. And again, is it an exact replica? No, because there are no Polaroid pictures. There are no social media postings from the ancient world that have any photographic evidence of what this particular vessel looked like. This is an artist rendering, and those who have studied it much more in depth than I have, this is what they come up with to help us try to picture what it might have looked like. I like other visual aids, and so when I think about the ark, this kind of helps me. We all know the length of a football field, including the end zones, which are also 10 yards deep. You take a football field, and then you add, about up to the 20-yard line, beginning at the end zone of another football field, and you have the length of the ark, 450 feet long. If you were to stand the ark on its end, it would be 450 feet long that way, tall, so to speak. And here are some other landmarks. The Tower of Pisa is 183 feet tall. Big Ben in London, 316 feet tall. The Statue of Liberty, 305 feet tall. And then the Great Pyramids of Giza, about 455 feet tall. And you see it's roughly about half the size of the Eiffel Tower. We've all seen pictures, maybe some of you again visiting that particular location in person. But the dimensions of the ark are of great interest simply because of the way in which they are ratioed. Height, length, and width. Is there something to be said about that? Well, of course, those who are skeptical of the Bible's origin and of God's existence, if they have any desire to lend any credibility to this episode, they'll just say, well, here's an account of some guy, he just decided to build a big boat and he just threw it together, as it were. Well, clearly that's not the case because, as the Bible tells us, it was made in such a way to be very seaworthy, to be able to float. And of course, that was its main purpose. Those of you that are a little older, you might remember some black and white footage of these particular vessels. These are the Liberty ships, constructed for cargo transport during World War II. I don't think Brother Greg has any of these for sale in his magazine. This is actually the Jeremiah O'Brien, the only surviving Liberty ship that still sails today. And it is anchored in San Francisco Bay, I think on Pier 45. It actually was made seaworthy again after being kind of scrapped, or at least scheduled to be scrapped by the Navy. And it sailed back to Normandy on the 50th anniversary of D-Day back in the 90s. And you can still, as I understand it, if you show up and pay the required sum, you can on certain days even take a tour of San Francisco Bay here on one of these World War II era Liberty ships. Now, of interest again, these ships were built according to those same dimensions. I think something was mentioned to that effect last night. Brother Dan, working in the business that he has in scrap, knows that barges today, many of them that traverse the Mississippi River and other waterways in our country, likewise built on those same ratios. And so it's of interest to us, of course, that how did Noah discover such an ratio? Well, they'll say it's a coincidence. And that's the standard answer for a lot of other genius, divine proofs of Scripture's inspiration and of the God behind it. Just another, if you're of interest in such matters. Remember when God told Abraham to circumcise his son. Remember what day he asked that ritual, that rite be performed? The 8th day. Medical research has discovered the clotting agent, vitamin K and other things, the clotting agent, the platelet agent in your blood, that means when you scrape your finger, what makes your blood clot, keep you from bleeding to death, of course. There is one time in an individual, a little boy's life, when that factor, that vitamin K factor, that clotting factor is at its highest. And you can probably guess what day that is. Day 8 of his life. It will never be higher at any point than that one. And in the ancient world, that was, of course, importance given what that particular ceremony ritual involved. Here are some other relevant facts. When people ask or they question, how was it or how is it that I'm on Abraham. Let me jump back to Noah here. How was it that he was able to do this? Well, what we sometimes fail to understand is that, as we spoke of last night, the great length of life for these patriarchs, and Brother Frank mentioned some of those, that helps us understand that they enjoyed far greater health and vitality, increased strength, mental acuity, and longer life. All of the things that beset us physically, no doubt did impact them, but with the continual degeneration of the genetic code as we get older, entropy, physical science tells us that everything is kind of falling apart. It's an oversimplification, of course, in our universe, and even our physical bodies bear proof of that. We're not living to these great lifespans anymore. God did put a limit on that, but these people in these early years following creation were able to enjoy these things that maybe we did not. Further, there was the availability of metal tools and hardware. Genesis 4:22. Again, we're kind of counteracting here or trying to combat the idea that people in antiquity were just cavemen. They just walked around and dragged their knuckles and took a wooden club like Fred Flintstone and mumbled some gibberish. That's not how God made Adam and Eve, and we can see that if we examine the scriptural record. Further, Noah did have 120 years to work. We'll answer a criticism about that momentarily. And there is a possibility of even additional family that he had to help him. Now, I say all of that to introduce what I consider, at least from my research and that of others, the number one objection to the account that there was a man named Noah. He did build an ark. He did fill it with animals, as God said. He did survive a worldwide flood. And that objection is variously posed in different ways, but here's the question as it sometimes appears. How could unintelligent, incapable amateurs build a seaworthy vessel of that size and in that amount of time? You see a problem with that question? It assumes something, doesn't it? There's a great assumption made in the way the question is phrased, and it's this: unintelligent and incapable. Why would they say it in that way? They say it in that way, of course, because you've observed, if you've read a science textbook, even on the middle school or high school level, certainly your college level biology textbook will have something to this effect, a diagram like this one. And this one is even not fully encompassing all of what the evolutionary viewpoint would entail. They would tell you that, of course, there are things back, if you were going left, as it were, from even more, or even from the more advanced to the less advanced, going from right to left. Of course, the man on the far right there, that represents us today, but people through the ages have evolved. They were once very, again, brutish, very ignorant, very incapable in so many different ways. So that's the assumption in the question. Noah, if he lived that long ago, he must have been incapable, he must have been incompetent, he must not have had skills, he must not have had proper tools. Those had not yet developed, but that's an assumption. And it's an assumption that cannot be sustained by looking at the evidence closely. The Bible does not teach, of course, that humans evolved from non-humans. The Bible teaches us that God created everything in 6 days, and crowning His creation, He made man from the dust of the ground in His own image. How that occurred, the mechanics of it, no one can say. None of us were there, but we take, because we know the Word of God to be true, that in faith it happened just as it is recorded to have happened. And God recorded that that was very good. And He makes Eve, of course, from the rib of Adam to complete, and again that attribution of being very good is given to this sort of creative work of God. Now, I mentioned that there is the possibility that there were, in days gone by, in years previous, an opportunity that in the beginning, without the thousands of years of genetic entropy that we face, where diseases and conditions that have spawned from genetic mutations. Again, I'm not the medical expert. Jerry and Paige are here. They could speak to this much more than I can, some of you other medical folks. But as I understand it, most of our diseases are the result of that. If we go back far enough, without those things plaguing the human family as they do today, we do even have archaeological evidence that perhaps in times past, human beings were more robust. They were bigger. You remember, in fact, in the opening of Genesis chapter 6, the Bible mentions there that there were, in verse 4, giants on the earth. Now, like you, I wonder what that's, describing. There are some guys that play in the NBA. Does that guy play for Boston that's like 7'6"? I mean, I don't know how you would manage life, just being that large. Scott Moore played at Smith County High School. I played at Jackson County High School. He was 7 feet tall. This was back in the mid-90s, and I remember, every time we played against him, all I was doing was just smelling his belly button all night. And I know that's a gross way to put it, but I mean, I was trying to guard him, and he's that much taller, and that's all that I was doing. And me and a couple of other guys, our job was just to, when he caught the ball, just hit him as hard as we could, basically, and try to wear him out. But here you see, and scientists have labeled these, of course, Homo sapiens. That's the specific name as we think about species that they give to human beings today. They call the guy on the left, or his physical remains, Homo heidelbergensis, I guess is maybe how you say it. So it might be that perhaps even long ago, human beings, instead of being less capable than we are today, might have actually been more capable, especially as it regards physical activity and work. And that goes against kind of the norm and the narrative, of course, but that's certainly a possibility. Now, concerning intelligence, is Noah an example of one who is incompetent and incapable? Again, go back to Genesis chapter 4. I referenced this briefly a moment ago, but let's look at it a little bit more in detail. Civilizations were being built. Genesis 4:17, the Bible says, he, that is Enoch, built a city and called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. They were building cities. Again, if you've taken a civilization history class, anthropology, sociology, even just generic history, you will read about the hunter-gatherers, and you will talk about then there were city dwellers, and they'll go through this long, just expansive description of how this gradual emergence of human intelligence came about. The Bible doesn't support such an idea. Instead, we see that very early on, civilizations were being built, people were interacting with one another and using their abilities, to the betterment, presumably, of the human race. Agriculture was being conducted, of course, as early as Genesis chapter 4, actually as early as chapter 2. God told Adam, you dress and you keep the garden. Of course, the earth was cursed following their sin. They're driven out of Eden, and even thereafter, in chapter 4, as we open with the birth of his two sons, Abel, his younger son, was a keeper of the sheep, a shepherd. Cain tilled the ground, engaging in agriculture, maybe at the imitation of his father. Musical instruments were designed and built. This is something, again, that's a detail that maybe you've read through many times without really stopping to think the significance of it. Here, giving a list of different individuals, especially from the Lamech lineage. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all those who play the harp and flute. There is some discrepancy in Hebrew study about what that word flute, that's what the New King James calls it. Some versions call it a pipe. It's a woodwind type of instrument, some instrument that would be blown in order to produce a sound. We could get Bruce maybe to give us some of the history about those sorts of things, but what it shows us is these aren't just, again, the prototypical, stereotypical, remember the old, the Geico commercials, you don't have to be a caveman, and they showed that guy, and he's walking around, he just looks like an imbecile. He doesn't know how to put two and two together. He's upset about, discounted car insurance, but music, because I have no skill at all in it whatsoever, not able to play a radio with great success, I appreciate the great intelligence that those who are able to do that, who can understand music, who can compose, who can play, who can do all of that. And that's evidently what's happening here very, very early on in the history of the human race. These aren't, Fred Flintstone and Barney, you driving around on their feet, in their little stone cars. These are intelligent people. Further, in chapter 4, verse 22, the same chapter, the Bible says, "As for Zillah, she also bore Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every craftsman in bronze and iron." Again, skill that had been acquired. Now, maybe back of all of this, I know some of you may be wanting to ask or have the answer to this question: how did they in fact gain this knowledge? Was it through trial and error, perhaps? Was it that God had given them, this ability? God told Adam to dress and keep the garden. Well, how did he know how to do that? This is the first garden, this is the first man. Did God provide some instruction to him that he was able to internalize and then pass on to his descendants and then their children and so on and so forth? Scripture doesn't say. But again, to say that the objection, as the skeptic will place it in question form, how could an unintelligent, incapable man produce a vessel of this size, is presupposing that he was unintelligent and incapable. And the Bible does not support that.
We still don't know how some of the structures that's built in the world was built, even today.
Absolutely. I love to watch the History Channel. Just sometimes you have to mute it because of all of their, slanted kind of dogma that they try to attach to certain things. But even them, the honest ones, will be perplexed, and they'll say, "How did you get a rock of this size up to a location that large?" There wasn't a crane to come in and pick it up and just drop it up there like we do with ease today. How did they do that? That was amazing. Their understanding of mathematics and engineering and all of that. Again, subjects I never had any ability to excel in at any level of school. That baffles my mind. So these were intelligent individuals. Further, let's explore briefly this idea that they were amateurs. That went by quickly, but the other slide just said amateurs. Concerning shipbuilding, and this was mentioned last night a little bit as well, so I'll explore it quickly with you. Boats were likely constructed before the ark. Have you ever thought of that? Now, that's an assumption, I realize, and speculative a little bit, but back in Genesis 2, as the earth is described, you remember that there were rivers, 4 of them in fact. There are those rivers that we, at least today, pinpoint as placing this somewhere in the area of modern-day Iraq because of the mention of the Euphrates River there. Whether that's the same one that still goes by that name today is again of some debate. But likely if there were these waterways, man may have already been constructing ships to navigate on these waterways even prior to the flood. Pre-flood shipwrights were likely more accomplished and not less. And why we say that is again all that we've said up to this point. They are individuals who are not ignorant as is supposed, but they are individuals who could have had the experience as well as the robust physical capabilities to do more than we even realize. How was Noah? Now, this again, I'm asking you just to consider possibilities here. How could Noah have built the ark? Why did God choose him? The easy answer, of course, is that he was a man who walked with God. And Brother Frank did a good job of bringing that out last night. He was not a perfect man in the sense of sinless, but he was a man who was faithful. He was a man who from his ancestors, his father and grandfathers, had heard something about the true God of heaven, the creator of everything, and Noah sought to honor him and to live as his word taught. And so God consequently finds with Noah grace. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord and given this task. Could it be also that Noah was a shipbuilder? That's a possibility by his work that he did. We have no way either to verify or to deny. Noah could have hired someone to help in this process. Again, what we're doing is we're taking the charge of the skeptic who says it's absolutely impossible, and we're introducing alternatives. You see, the only way to defeat an argument that is what we would say a universal prohibition, if someone says it absolutely could not happen, the easy way to overturn that is to at least produce one tenable possibility as to how it could, how it might have happened. That's the same way you handle Bible contradictions. That, by the way, if someone says, well, the Bible contradicts itself, if you can introduce one possible way that contradiction may not be true, they have no way to prove what they're asserting, and you have at least introduced the possibility of doubt. In our jurisprudence system, it's the instruction you're given as a jury. Is this person guilty beyond a reasonable doubt? If there's a reasonable doubt, you have to acquit if you're going to follow the law as it is stated. And so Noah might have hired someone to help. And then the last answer, of course, that most of you might say should be the first, and I'm not putting them in order of importance, God helped him. Now, how God did that precisely, again, we are not told. Could God have helped him? Well, most certainly he could have. And the way in which he chose to do that, I don't know. But if God is the chief engineer of the universe, I think he would be more than capable of making a boat of this size or any other size that he wanted. So the idea that Noah is ignorant, that he is incompetent, that he is incapable, it just doesn't hold up. We've shown why that can be easily dismissed, and that he, not as an amateur, but may in fact have had great expertise that we're unaware of. A second, or a third, I guess it is now, objection that's often lodged against this episode, that there was a man named Noah, that he built an ark, that he put the animals on it. They would say, well, how could he build something that was seaworthy? And skeptics argue that they have come up with parallel examples to show that this entire episode is unlikely to have been true. And here's one of their favorite. I don't know how many of you have ever heard of the Wyoming. The Wyoming was built, the largest wooden ship built in 1909. Shortly thereafter, wooden ships, at least on this scale, ceased to be built. Of course, this is 1909. Anybody remember what happens in 1912? Big ship. Not even God can sink it. Yeah, God does. My theory, that's another lesson for another day. So the Wyoming was the last ship built on what we might say a very massive, large scale. It sank in 1924. And the reason it sank was because that its boards would twist, and the torsion of them caused leakage. And of course, over time, given enough of that leakage and buckling and twisting, it sank. Now, the skeptic says, see, this vessel, and I couldn't find the exact dimensions of it. I'm not sure exactly how big, and this is a picture from way back then that at least shows it. I'm not sure of its dimensions, but it's safe to say the ark was larger. And they said, see, if a boat this size would sink, then the ark most surely would have as well. But again, what are the assumptions? I told you that this ship was built in 1909. When did it sink? 1924. How long was Noah on the ark? 1 year, 17 days. Plenty of time, even if it were, as it were, leaking, maybe. Furthermore, you notice the mast on this large vessel, the sails, as they would be unfurled, would of course cause some of that buckling and twisting. Did the ark have sails? Not a one. Was the ark a vessel that was to travel from point A to point B? Not in the least. All the ark had to do was what? Float. That was it. Further, if we're going to be honest with the evidence, let's go back to the ancient Egyptians who around 2000 BC, this is when it's generally dated, their ships that they traversed the Nile River with. Here's one example of those. They used, even at that very primitive, quote-unquote, time, mortise and tenon joints. Now we could, if we went down to Clyde's shop, you could probably demonstrate that for us, couldn't you, in making furniture even today. But they would use that in shipbuilding. And it makes a very strong bond. It makes something that would be interlocking to the point that it would be, if not completely waterproof, maybe that pitch or that tar that we mentioned would be able to seal in the rest of any leakage that might be there. And so that's an easy way for us to say again, are we proving or do we say with certainty that this is the way in that it happened in fact? No, I'm not saying that this is exactly the way in which it happened. I can't say that. There's not a person alive, past, present, or future, who can be able to say they know exactly how it was constructed and what forms it took. We're just saying here are some possibilities. And we are again overturning the skeptic who says it's absolutely impossible. No, we've shown possibility. So the idea, again, that Noah was an amateur, that he didn't know what he was doing, that the boat was not seaworthy, all of that we dismiss. Here's objection number 4, I think. Enough time. They would tell you, the skeptic again, that the ark, it's a large vessel you're talking about there, preacher, 450 feet long, over a football field and almost a half another one. There's not enough time that the Bible records for him to complete this work. Well, let's do a little math. As I said, my math is not very good, but I think I can do this simple enough. If Noah worked 6 days a week and rested on the 7th, following the example that God took in creation week, and he worked only 8 hours a day. Okay, so those are our numbers. If some of you math folks want to crunch it, I think I'm right. 6 days a week, 8 hours a day, for 120 years, you come up roughly with 300,000 working hours that Noah had to build the ark. 300,000. Well, what's the significance of that? That's a long time. 300,000 hours over 120 years. But he had 3 sons. And those 3 sons, interestingly, were born while the ark was being constructed. You may say, how do you know that? Because the Bible mentions that his oldest son is 98 when they enter the ark. So they're born during that period of time. But after they attain some level of maturity and age, they are able to join him in this work. Now, maybe this number is a little high. I'll give you that. I'll make that concession that maybe this number with his sons are a little high if you were to add their work on top of his. But you keep kind of adding on to it. We have Noah, we have Mrs. Noah, we have those 3 sons, we have their wives, work that they could probably do, may not have been certainly as strenuous as that of the men, but we reach the point where we have 1.8, generous figure, but I think very conservative at the same time, figure to say 1.8 million working hours to build a vessel of this size. Could it be done in that amount of time? Again, I'm fairly confident in saying it absolutely could. I know that it could, and I know that it did. Not even to introduce any doubt whatsoever. And so here we just have math at least working in our favor. The replica in Kentucky, some of you have visited there. Brother Bruce was there, I think he said last week. If you've looked at that massive, that's on the same scale, actual scale of the ark itself, it took 280,000 hours about a decade ago, I think, when they first started that project, maybe a little farther back than that. Now, they had modern equipment, that's true, and they had advantages that Noah did not have, that's true, but still 280,000 working hours is a very small percentage of that over 1 million working hours that we said that Noah maybe had at his disposal in order to build the ark. So he had plenty of time to construct the ark. Again, an objection that's put forward as being something that's almost sure to disprove this account as being factual or accurate, historically verifiable, we can dismiss. Well, I told you that we had to do the ark. We also have to do the animals. Now, see, this is where we would transition and give you another 45 minutes and another lesson, but let's try to again put them together tonight. The ark and the animals. Here is the second objection, and it's kind of the big heading. Objection number 1 was the big heading. We put subpoints under it. Here's the second big heading. We talked about this a little bit last night as well. How could millions of animal species fit on the ark? How could Noah put all of those animals on the ark? Well, here is again an assumption. Today, the catalog number of species according to biologists. I don't know if Abby was here, she could probably give us this number. Most of us, I'm sure, would greatly underguess that number. The number of accurate cataloged different species of animal life on the planet today, according to biologists, is 1.8 million. That's fascinating to me. 1.8 million different species of animal life on the planet today. I've told the folks here at Crossville, one of my treasured memories that I have with my father as I think about Father's Day coming up was going home after church on Sunday night and watching Channel 22, the public television station out of Cookville, watching nature. Now again, he would have to say, no, that's not an animal millions of years old, or no, it didn't evolve from this one, God did. And so he was doing apologetics probably without even his awareness of it. But to look at all the variation in the color, and some animals are just exquisite. Some of them are like some of the rest of us. They're a little on the ugly side. Some of them are beautiful beyond comparison. But 1.8 million, how could Noah put over all of that? Now, of interest, biologists, even those from an evolutionary paradigm, are asserting, and they assume that there are upwards, they think, of 10 million different species on the planet tonight. So we've only discovered about 10%, maybe 20% of the actual number that are throughout the earth if we were able to catalog each one. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. That's just a little detail to throw in there. But here's what we spoke of last night, and here's what we think about now. When we say Noah took the animals on the ark, well, are we talking about every breed of dog? We'll start at the bottom and work our way up. And so you dog lovers will have to tell me all of the different kinds. I know the one kind of in the center, he's kind of hard to see there, but he's a German Shepherd. That looks like a Dalmatian center right, and a Collie, and whatever else. I had those real fancy dogs growing up. They were called mutts. And, so you have all of those variations of dogs. Well, did Noah have to get one of each of these? No, likely very few or any of the modern breeds were even existing at the time of the ark. Instead, Noah took a pair of the canine species. And from that, what happens? Well, again, over time. Now, here's where you have to listen very carefully, because some of you will walk out and say, that preacher said he believed in evolution. I believe in microevolution. And biology, facts support that. What do you mean by that? I mean that there can be adaptation and change within a species. And when we breed dogs, that's proof of it. You can take one type and you can breed it with another type, and you can have a different type then. That is the result. That's what we call microevolution. I believe that species, that animals can adapt to their environment, and they can change over a period of time. Certain genetic traits may be more favorable than others. Those of you that have grown up on a farm, when we raise beef cattle, there's certain characteristics, there's certain bloodlines we try to keep going because they have traits that we like as opposed to others that we don't.
There's one thing about species, there's less genetic material in these breeds of dogs than there were in the original.
Yes.
There's no big dog genes left in the Chihuahua.
Right. You've bred that out. That's an undesirable trait.
Breeding out.
Right.
It's not, you take a cat and a dog, and pretty soon you have something,
Well, you can't do the cat.
They don't add genetic material to any animal
Right.
anymore. It's a missing genetic.
You have to stay within kinds. But canine kind, you have foxes, you have wolves, you have jackals. From that, you can get coyotes and dingoes. I think they live in Australia. And then your sample of dogs. So instead of this 1.8 million number, you're talking about a much smaller number of animals that would have actually been there. Now, we've talked about this already, but this is where this idea circles back around. What about the size? Is the ark big enough to sustain such a size as needed to house all of these animals? We actually took a group, our young people, I think that was 2018. I looked for our pictures from that and I couldn't find it because we took a picture much like this one. Here's one that Brother Jeff Miller and the Apologetics Press folks, he and his family and others took. There, if you take the square and put it back next to the ark, that's the scale. It's very impressive to just see the vastness of how large this particular vessel actually was. Now, I mentioned earlier that we were talking about a cubit. Tip of your elbow to the top of your middle finger, for most of us, is roughly 18 inches. For some, it's a little less. For some, it's a little more. But typically, that's what it averages out to. If you use an 18-inch cubit, then we say the ark was 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. But remember that big skull of the guy that I showed you? If humans were more robust, bigger physically, stronger physically, it's possible with a skull of that size that humans in Noah's day were much larger and might have had a cubit, that is, from their elbow to the tip of their middle finger, might have been as much as 25 inches in length. Now let's do a little bit of fun math with that. If in fact a 25-inch cubit was the size of a cubit that Noah used, that would change the space of the ark from 1.5 million cubic feet to 4 million cubic feet. That makes a difference. Just to give you an idea, even on the size and scale of the ark that it was built, using the 18-inch, the 450 by 50 by 30, the ark, it was big enough. It contained 101,250 square feet of total deck space. That's 21 basketball courts, if you're interested. If Noah's ark was put inside of a walking track, that's basically what you would have to walk around the walking track 2.5 times in order to get around the ark. You could put 6 monster trucks on its top. You could put 527 rail cars inside the ark. It's a big, big boat, and it would have well easily housed all that it needed to house. Let's go quickly because this is what a lot of folks want to know. What about the dinosaurs? Well, here's an interesting idea. Does the Bible even mention dinosaurs? Well, no. So the skeptic will say, see, the Bible's wrong. It doesn't mention dinosaurs. We know dinosaurs exist. We can see those skeletons when we go to the museum. Here's something of interest for you. The Bible never mentions cats, kangaroos, elephants, aardvarks, anteaters, platypuses, and penguins. And so your kitty cat says, wait a minute, I don't even exist. What? You know, it's a silly argument, isn't it? The Bible was written 1900 years ago, completed, we think, thereabouts. It's translated into English, rough figures, around 1535. There may have been some earlier work prior to this. The English word dinosaur was not coined until 1842. You can't find it anywhere in English usage before that. Dinos, saurus, fearfully great lizard or reptile. So what are we saying? Are you saying that dinosaurs were on the ark? And the answer is yes. That's what I'm saying. How do I know that? Because the fossil record supports that they are found alongside human beings post-ark. And you may say, well, how in the world could they have possibly fit? The largest fossil dinosaur eggs that we have found, digging up throughout the world, indicate that a 40-foot long dinosaur laid eggs that were less than a foot in diameter. The average size of all the skeletal remains that we have found of dinosaurs throughout the world is about the size of a bison or a buffalo. As hatchlings, even the largest dinosaurs were no bigger than an average house pet. Could they have fit on the ark? Yes, they most certainly could. Here is one. Again, this is courtesy of Apologetics Press. This is a sauropod egg. We used to call them brontosauruses. Now they call them sauropods. But anyway, that's the eggs that we think, and at least as what we found in the fossil record, the eggs they laid. So that's not very big at all. What about the other animals? An adult African elephant, he eats 600 pounds of food a day. He weighs 14,000 pounds. But if we were to take juveniles on the ark, we would only have about 1,000-pound elephant, which eats only about 5% of its weight every day, a great difference. Now, all I've attempted to do tonight is to show you that the ark, as constructed by Noah, as the Bible describes, and the animals that are mentioned that are getting their own, are not illogical or irrational to believe in as having occurred in the way that the Bible describes it. The biblical record leaves us with many questions, I'll admit. It leaves us wondering about how this, how that, and it does not provide the answers. And so all that we can do, as we've done tonight in some ways, is to make some assumptions, make some guesses with the evidence that we have. But there is no claim or no objection that has ever been or ever shall be leveled by the critic that can overturn truth of Scripture as we have it revealed in His Word.